Welcome back. We were talking about M.H. Abrams' view of deconstructive method and especially that exchange that took place between M.H. Abrams and J. Hillis Miller. Think about those two analogs which M.H. Abrams mentioned when talking about deconstructive theory. One is Ariadne's thread and the other is spider's web. In other words, the concept of text which cannot be understood, but still there is some pleasure in reading that text, there is some pleasure in approaching that text. These two activities are in a way related. M.H. Abraham further says that when we reach the end of an interpretation, a deconstructive interpretation, we find that the text is actually not saying much. In other words, something which is indeterminate, something which cannot be deciphered, something which cannot be read, that is emphasized in deconstructive reading. But he makes another interesting point, and that interesting point is that many deconstructionist critics are double agents. Double agent means, on the one hand, they emphasize this aspect of language where it cannot say anything determinate. And on the other hand, they also use language to say something determinate. That means, on the one hand, they suggest that language cannot say anything determinate. But on the other hand, they use that very language to make their point. And that's why he calls them double agents. Then he gives a citation, or rather, he refers to a poem by William Blake, and that poem is The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And in that poem, what happens is that Blake meets an angel. Blake meets an angel, and that angel presents before Blake a very, very terrible view of hell. Very terrible view of hell. And what is that terrible view of hell? That in hell you see sun, but sun is black. In hell you see spiders with their webs. And in other words, it's a very ghastly kind of vision. And he naturally feels scared. But then the angel disappears. And when that angel disappears, Blake finds himself sitting on the bank of a river. And it is a very pleasant kind of scene, lovely. There is also a fountain close by. The angel comes back. The angel asks Blake, how did you come out of that hell? That means, I left you there in hell, which had sun shining black, which had spiders all around, and which had a very ghastly kind of atmosphere. How did you come out of that? And Blake said, oh, it was all due to your metaphysics. That means, you created that kind of hell. You created that vision of hell. And once you disappeared, the hell also disappeared. So M.H. Abraham is using this image to suggest deconstructive method of criticism, where when you see deconstructive criticism, you probably reach that hell-like scene, but once you are out of that, you see that that scene disappears altogether. And that's why he calls deconstructive critics double agent, because he says that, okay, I can follow what Miller is saying. I know Miller is making certain moves. I know Miller will say this, and I know that after Miller has talked about something, he will write this particular thing. And then when we read that writing, we will be better placed to understand something, because when you hear somebody speaking, then you may not pay attention to some words, but when you read something and that thing is there in writing, then you follow something at your own space, at your own pace. I'm sorry. So that is how he concludes his argument, and that is how he also highlights his differences with Hillis Miller and the kind of criticism which Hillis Miller represents. Now, when Hillis Miller opens his essay, The Critic as Ghost, in his essay, you can see the deconstructive method at work. So, read that essay to understand the deconstructive method and that method in use. So, Miller first talks about a line which is used by M.H. Abraham. And what is that line which is used by M.H. Abraham? That line is, M.H. Abraham has written that a deconstructive reading is a deconstructive reading of a given work is plainly and simply parasitical on the obvious or univocal reading. I am repeating this sentence. This is a sentence which Miller quotes. A deconstructive reading of a given work is plainly and simply parasitical on the obvious or univocal reading. There are four keywords here. One is plainly and simply parasitical on the obvious or univocal reading. Rather, there are three keywords here. One is parasitical. That means deconstructive reading is parasitical. It is a kind of parasite. And it is parasitical on what? The obvious or univocal reading. The obvious or univocal reading. So what are the three key words here? Parasitical, obvious, univocal. What Miller does is, Miller picks up this sentence. So we are also learning something about the strategy that is used in deconstructive criticism. Miller picks up this sentence and he says that this sentence is interesting. And in this sentence, M.H. Abraham has quoted Wayne C. Booth. Wayne C. Booth. So the first two, three words come from Wayne C. Booth. And what are those words? Plainly and simply parasitical. Deconstructive reading is plainly and simply parasitical. These words are the words of Wayne C. Booth, plainly and simply parasitical. On the obvious or univocal reading, these are M.H. Abraham's words. Obvious or univocal reading. Obvious or univocal reading. And he picks up this sentence, he separates the words of Booth from the words of M.H. Abraham, and then he proceeds. And first he talks about the use of a quotation or a citation in a work. We are always citing somebody when we are writing something. We are always using somebody else's words and quoting them in our essays. So Miller talks about the very act of citation, and then he dwells on that. Is citation is citation imprisoned within a text? Is citation imprisoned within a text, or it is something different? And then this relationship between a citation and the text. We have come across the word grafting in discussing Jacques Derrida's ideas. So the concept of grafting also becomes relevant here. Say, writing also has this feature where something can be grafted. something can be cited, something can be quoted, and something can be quoted which may also be quoted out of context. So Miller talks by talking about this quotation, by talking about the import of these quotations, by dwelling on the significance of this quotation, Miller is also revealing a deconstructive strategy. And then he dwells on this, the citation. What role does it have? What role does it have in a text? Is it can it threaten the meaning of the text? And he's trying to show that it can. So we learn something about this strategy. Derrida also used often a keyword, or often some words, or often a minor detail, or maybe a fragment from a text. And then he will offer a reading of that fragment to suggest that that fragment, that minor detail, can threaten the very foundation of the text. So Miller is doing something similar. Then he dwells on this word parasitical. Parasitical. What is parasitical? What is parasitical? And then he talks about all other words which use this prefix para. Para. Right. And of course, the word parasite. First, he uses an image. And what is that image? That the word parasite suggests that there is a host, and host is like an oak tree, strong, standing firm. But that oak tree also has a vine, vine, vine. And that vine is a kind of creeper, which is hanging, which is dependent on oak tree, which is sucking the blood of the host. So this word suggests this. And then he further talks about parasite. And there are words, other words like paragon, like para, and he gives a list of, say, at least 50 of those words, beginning with the words para. Then he also talks about the history of this word parasite, because the word parasite has the prefix para, and para also means alongside. Para also means proximity, but para also suggests in some words distance. So when this prefix suggests both proximity and distance, that means it can suggest something contradictory. Para also suggests the idea of, in many words, the prefix para, it also suggests the idea of interiority, and it also suggests the idea of exteriority. Right. Then further, he talks about this word parasite, and he says that the word also has Greek roots, and its Greek root is parasitos. Parasitos. So it means the word para there means beside the grain, and cytology there means science of food. So originally the word parasite also had a positive meaning. What was that positive meaning? Somebody who is say related to food. But gradually the word parasite acquired some negative meanings, and so parasite became a person who was able to take advantage of the hospitality of the host without giving anything in return. Right. So that means this, say, dwelling on the word parasite, dwelling on different, say, meanings of the word parasite, dwelling on the prefix para, thinking about all possible words, And then he goes on to talk about other words, not only in English language, but also in French, also in, say, Greek. And he comes to this conclusion that the word parasite possibly can suggest all possible contradictory meanings, where one cannot make up one's mind about something. Then he looks at another word. And what is that other word? The word host. Because if there is parasite, and because the word comes from the word cytology, which is science of food, then it also has this relationship between a parasite and the host. That means somebody who eats at somebody's expense without giving anything in return. What is the meaning of host? And then host is discussed in relationship to guest. And then again, a detailed discussion of the word host, where the word host also suggests different meanings. If we take the word in its historical context, if we take all possible meanings of the word host. What is the point of all this exercise on the part of J. Hillis Miller? First, we have learned this strategy that he picks up some keywords and he also picks up a citation and he also talks about the role of a citation. Then he talks about the role of those keywords. And then he says that this is just a very small example of showing how the context of a word can be widened further and
Generally,
further, further and further, further and further. That means you have a word and its context can be widened further and further and further. And it also suggests what if you let language go, then language can go anywhere. If you let language go, then the context widens further and further. That is deconstructive strategy. So when this kind of widening of context is suggested by words, and this kind of widening is possible when language can possibly go in all possible directions, when language has that kind of potential where it can go in all possible directions, where is the point of the obvious and univocal reading? That means, how can you have a reading which is just obvious? How can you have a reading which is just univocal? How can you have a reading which is just ignorant, blind to what language can do, what language can do, and if one can let language go? And here he comes to this point that language cannot probably suggest something determinate in a manner suggested by M.H. Abrams. So this is something which you find in Hillis Miller, and this is a strategy also, that if you are reading a deconstructive, say, reading of a work, then deconstructive reading often dwells on a word, on a keyword, or on a minor fragment in a text, or a minor detail in a text, and then it threatens to undermine the assumptions of the text. So here M.H. Abraham has that assumption that a reading can be obvious or it can be univocal, or if not univocal, at least say a text can say something determinate. Miller is trying to suggest that it is not possible because of the very nature of language. Then Miller shows another kind of strategy. And what is that another strategy in the hands of a deconstructionist critic? That strategy is related to the concept of trace. And there he gives the example of Shelley's poem, The Triumph of Life. The Triumph of Life. And he says that in a work, in a literary work, you have often an echo of some other work. You often have a trace of some other work. You often have an influence of some other work. You often have a quotation of some other work. You often have a direct influence or indirect influence. That means here we are also learning something about the concept of intertextuality, where all texts are related to each other. But Miller is talking about something much more subversive. That if we read a poem, then we can see the echo, the influence, the trace, the quotations of all those other poems before that. And here he also quotes Harold Bloom. Harold Bloom talked about anxiety of influence, where a poet becomes conscious of the belated nature of his work. And so he tries to grapple with his belated status. And so he tries to adopt different strategies whereby he distorts or misreads the work of his predecessor poets. So that means this is also an important strategy where you read a work and you try to see the trace of other works and you try to see how this work could not have been possible. Miller talks about the triumph of life by Shelley and he tries to show the influence of Wordsworth. He tries to show the influence of Milton and so on. And he says that in this way, a work forms a kind of chain where you see the trace of all those other works. This also suggests something. It is not easy to offer a deconstructive reading of a poem because if you see this strategy followed by Hillis Miller, then probably you have to be a very well-read person. You have to be a very well-read person of literary text to see the element of influence, to see that element of trace. Because if you have read maybe just one work, you will not become suspicious of the trace of other works. But if you have read lots of works, if you have read the whole genre of poetry, then maybe you can see those traces in a much more obvious manner. Similarly, if you look at those words and you see the relationship of that word and all those other words, and you see that word in terms of its history of roots, then probably you will be able to see the complexity in the use of language. So deconstructive strategy appears very innovative. It also requires vast reading, and that's why, say somebody like Terry Eagleton and others, they also marvel at the inventiveness of this approach. But there is also this that ultimately it is probably not saying much. I'll end this talk with one interesting observation, and you can think about it. In literature, in literature, an interpretation is often a matter of a good performance. That means it is not the truth which is very important in the act of interpretation of a literary work, but the performance, impressive performance becomes important. And so if we see many of these deconstructive readings, they are really impressive performances. But one cannot dismiss them because they do show something about the nature of language. Now we have maybe 5 minutes for discussion and can have a question. Madhya is there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Madhya, you can welcome our say colleague Musawwir Hussain. He and many of his colleagues have joined from Shahjahanpur. You can welcome Musawwir from GF College. That is Shahjahanpur, Gandhi Faizan College.
Okay. Assalamualaikum, sir, and welcome to the classes that we've been going on for a lot of weeks now. And I see where you coming back to study from Asam Saab comes from, because going and learning literary theory, we kind of have the notion that the more and more classes the better for it. So welcome, and I hope that you get to, I'm sure that you already well versed with the theories and everything, but you'll get to revise and get to learn more and more from it.
Hello.
Hello, yes sir, are you able to hear me? Hello.
Hello.
Yes, Musafir, would you like to say something? Good to see you here.
Okay, sir. Only today I could attend your classes.
Yeah.
The previous day I was not here because of some of my preoccupations,
Yeah.
and I'm like a sincere student. I'm listening you, and give me some more time to listen you honestly. Only then, after 2-4 classes, I shall be able to say something. Not now.
Good.
Now I'm not in a position to say
No,
something
we were
just now.
just, I just wanted you to say
Actually,
hello. That's all. That's all. Yeah.
okay.
Now,
I'm fine.
yeah, good to see you. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Tomorrow and day after
Thank you.
tomorrow, we will have a discussion about, say, what we have done so far. And I may announce something here. Tomorrow, I have invited Professor Roshan Lal Sharma. He is the Dean and the Chairman of the Department of English, Central University of Himachal Pradesh. A good friend. He'll be very happy to meet you. But
Okay.
basically, this is your session. So he'll be there just to say hello to you. And day after tomorrow, I have
Okay.
invited, say, Professor Krishnan Unni. He is with Delhi University. He is a well-known writer in Malayali language and a very well-known critic. So we'll have some company also tomorrow
Okay.
and day after tomorrow. Now you have to think about your panelists. Now I'll communicate with you on WhatsApp. We'll finalize
Okay.
panelists, but I expect, say, one person maybe from MA fourth semester, or and one person from MA second semester. And Madhya, you also have a job to do. You have to say give your inputs wherever there is some silent movement. That means we should not